You have failed me for the last time.
Jedi Fallen Order is a new kind of EA game. It's a game that releases in the midst of the monetization trend and ignores it. It's a game that isn't hyper-focused on EA's wider business initiatives. It's a game that the publisher gave the developers the time and resources to create their way. Jedi Fallen Order is a new kind of EA game in every single way that we as gamers should expect from a company charging $60 for their product. But I think in today's gaming conversation, it's easy to forget who to give credit to, when it's so easy to identify what entity is filling games with the stuff we don't want. It's easy to forget that when they don't do that, it's not them we should be giving credit to for not doing that. It's them giving us the space to identify the people that really deserve our attention. This piece isn't for talking about every little thing in Jedi Fallen Order. Instead, I want to talk about everything it does right and in some small ways wrong, as it slowly unfolds into the best Star Wars game we've gotten in a decade. As with every new release, I will be keeping gameplay footage and most of the information, I guess, to the first third or so of the game. That way there are absolutely no spoilers and there will also be no gameplay spoilers. But I think it has to start with how we got here. I really do believe that this bit from my preview of the game's place in the industry is apt context, so let me let that play. Star Wars Battlefront 2 is viewed by most gamers as maybe the biggest disaster in modern gaming, but what those people usually forget is that it was a sequel to an equally disastrous outing. From the moment EA got their hands on a Star Wars license, a 10-year deal by the way from Disney, they decided they were going to make games built strictly around the opportunity for monetization, and far worse yet, games that they felt anybody could feel like a winner playing. In the process, they created the first Battlefront game, well, the reboot, to be a giant, hey look I'm pretty simulator. The game was laughably shallow in every way, intentionally so to allow just about anybody to get their hands on it and feel good. From its lottery-based hero mechanics to its total depletion of content, it was a $60 parody of what Star Wars Battlefront used to be. So in response, EA went, gosh, we actually have to make a game with a sequel. That's going to take money, so we better gouge our customers to ensure we keep that bottom line pretty. And boy, did they ever. EA quickly became the Darth Maul of Star Wars gaming. I'm not going to bore you with the details of one of the most covered controversies of this generation, but there's something important to note here. Gamers finally spoke. Sales were disappointing, the game's player count dwindled rapidly, the response was literally national news, and EA was vilified to the point where it's reported that Disney had to step in and force EA to remove the launch loot boxes, even if EA would eventually claim the removal was only temporary. And this is important, because this generation, EA hasn't just cannibalized Star Wars, but they've turned every single one of their franchises into an always-online multiplayer money-first charade. Titanfall was next, but this is also where Respawn and Fallen Order come into play, because what happened around this catastrophe is probably the only reason EA greenlit Fallen Order. And then from there, long story short, EA swallows the launch of Titanfall 2 whole with bad decisions, it sells poorly, and Respawn is bought by EA right after, coincidentally. And yet, the second you start playing Fallen Order, you realize, oh yeah, it's still Respawn. I love the original Force Unleashed. I think it's the best depiction of a Jedi in a game we've ever gotten. After playing Fallen Order, I still believe that, but Fallen Order does just as great of a job. It's just different. Let's start with combat. Fallen Order is not about the power fantasy of using the Force, it's about the risks and isolation of being one of the last Jedis alive in the galaxy. Its combat is not like Dark Souls. I want to make that abundantly clear. It isn't as hard as Dark Souls. It isn't designed to be as precise. It's not supposed to be. It is, however, excellent. Fallen Order uses the typical block, parry, roll functions of similar action games. The good news is, with a lightsaber and the agility of Cal, it rises above a lot of its contemporaries. Cal is fast, he's mobile, and with a few upgrades, extremely deadly. His dash allows him to close gaps quickly, his roll is a nice get-out-of-pain-free card, and his lightsaber is the toolbox of all weaponry. It's a shield, it's a projectile, it's a blade. It is so many things in combat that at times it feels like a part of Cal, an extension of him, and that leads to a level of control in combat that this game had to nail. And it did. Sure, the game is tough at times, which is where you'll see a lot of the Dark Souls comparisons come in. I've seen people say they're dying so much that it's so frustrating. I never really had any of that. I tested almost every difficulty, and the game probably plays best on harder difficulty settings. This is because the game isn't really all that challenging for most of your playthrough on the lower settings. If you're smart and play with any bit of strategy on any difficulty, you should be okay. I do think higher difficulties both make the game more intense, but also stave off the overwhelming power it feels like you have sometimes in the second half of the game. And they're even more important because dying here matters, which is something so many modern games fail to even attempt to make a part of their gameplay loop. So many games are hyper-focused on keeping you engaged, keeping you having fun, and, well, not necessarily challenging you. But dying today is often just a song and dance of, well, let me get back to this checkpoint that's 3 seconds behind and go right back through to where I was, or let me reload my save that auto-saved 30 seconds ago or 10 seconds ago. And it makes a lot of action games, specifically combat-focused action games, feel so much less intense, and it takes a lot of the fun out of them. Here, again, it's kind of Dark Souls style. You meditate at save spots where you can upgrade and rest and heal. When you die, you lose all progress towards your next upgrade and are sent back to your last meditation point. If you can get back to the enemy that killed you, you can recover that XP and your health by dealing damage to them once. It is an excellent, if a little unoriginal, mechanic that adds real weight to the tougher combat and ensures that there's an air of consequence and intensity to your fights. And as for those fights, oh man, do lightsabers look, feel, and sound great. Combat is weighty. Swinging your lightsaber is an act that isn't instantaneous. It takes time, as does lifting it to block or parry, so when you do swing it, it's so satisfying. Cutting through a stormtrooper into a finisher never gets old. And it feels like a kinetic action, something that required energy. And that feeling of weight is really what separates this from a lot of the Star Wars games of the past. As for enemies, some of the tougher ones will force you to make use of your upgrades that run the gamut from new sprint strikes to more force power. The AI is fine, if not almost always aggressive, and there's enough variety here to keep it interesting, but strangely enough, Cal and his moves and the way he engages with these enemies is more of a star than they are. Now the Force, that's a different beast altogether. See, Fallen Order is half Uncharted and half Force Unleashed. You'll spend just as much time climbing, puzzle solving, and sliding as you will slicing through giant alien spiders. This is where the Force becomes your friend. To stop a fan, push a ball, move a pipe. Sure, it's fun in combat. Freezing enemies is awesome, and throwing stormtroopers off a cliff is always funny, but your Force powers are kind of limited in combat. Yet when you are solving puzzles and stopping fans, you're doing it so stylishly and so smoothly that it's hard not to love the moments when the combat does stop. Running and bouncing off of walls, jumping into slides, and using ropes and grappling is not something Respawn is unfamiliar with. Play the Titanfall 2 campaign and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. There is a lot of what's on hand here in that game, and that expertise paid off. Moving through these worlds is incredibly satisfying. The traversal is wonderful. You always feel like a Jedi. And that alone is the very thing a Star Wars game must accomplish if it's going to hand you the reins to a Force user. But what I'm really glad this game got right is something else altogether. The thing I'm most excited to talk about in an actual spoiler video is the worlds. This is, without a doubt, the most beautiful Star Wars game ever created. So here, instead of focusing on and spoiling where you'll go, I want to instead focus on the level design and how they built these worlds in the context of playing within them. A lot of people pre-release talked about how the branching paths of the game's levels were incredibly unique and how it wasn't really an open world game but more like a Borderlands 3 style pseudo open world. That's a comparison I saw a lot when it came to the game's levels, Borderlands 3. See, in that game, you travel to planets just like here and traverse your way across maps to reach your objectives, just like here. It still feels open, and it manages to invoke the feeling of vastness you expect in open world games. However, that last part is where Fallen Order splits off. It is not like Borderlands 3's pseudo open worlds. It simply shares in common how you get to them. And I think calling Fallen Order's worlds open is even a bit disingenuous. Instead, the levels are more like tightly wound, intricate mazes. You're never in a wide open space, with objectives flanking you on all sides. You're not running around searching for sprawling side missions. You're not meeting new NPCs in their homes. Instead, you're always trying to find your way to one place, sometimes two. What I love about the level design here is more times than not, the levels themselves become the puzzles. There are so many shortcuts, hidden secrets, hidden bosses, and you never stumble upon them running wildly through a field. They're always neatly tucked away behind a maze of platforming and exploration. You'll find workbenches to customize your lightsaber, new ponchos, BD1 skins, and story collectibles if you take your time to look behind that next corner. Some paths are blocked, but by the time you leave the planet, they won't be. Finding your way back to your ship then, after clearing a tomb, is a journey of Boy Scout-like instincts, new paths, and a little bit of luck. And that may sound arduous, I actually think instead it's commendable. There's no compass pointing you to your objective. There's no button holding to bring up a line and arrow to point you in the right direction. There is no hand-holding. The game wants you to take it in, not zoom through it. It forces you to explore and discover its levels relatively organically, which means their beauty and intricacies are even more rewarding to uncover. And these levels are so dense, you're never not finding something of interest. Whether it's an icy mountain or a lush forest, the aesthetics alone are worth slowing down to a light jog to take in. I will say, however, that I do not like the map. This guy right here, BD1, who by the way is absolutely adorable and a perfect companion, can show you the level map at any time. It looks like this. Green doors are good to go, red doors are inaccessible, yellow are shortcuts. The problem is, the map does a poor job of showing you when, say, a cliff ends, or you're hitting a dead end. It's also practically useless at times when levels have a lot of gaps, rope jumps, or elevation, because those gaps are often inaccessible at different points and different heights, depending on whether you're at the top or bottom of a cliff, and it can be confusing. Yet that does not, however, take away from just how great of a job Respawn did in making worlds that you want to explore. And importantly, worlds that feel alien, foreign, while still feeling, looking, and sounding like Star Wars. This also extends to the tombs. Yes, there's a bit of Tomb Raider here. For a good portion of the game, these are what you're looking for. And once you're inside them, they are something you've seen quite a few times in games like Uncharted and Tomb Raider. They are super big labyrinths of puzzle solving and platforming with a Force-imbued twist. They're almost always fun, if not sometimes a little frustrating, and they feel and look ancient. The walls are carved with languages you don't understand, clearly built by things with technology far beyond ours. The tombs do an excellent job of continuing the allure of the worlds outside of it in smaller, sectioned off settings. But the reason you'll even explore them is the story. And again, don't worry, no spoilers. I think the one facet of this game I was most concerned about coming in was its story. Those of you that follow this channel closely know that I really like Star Wars, like a lot. So much so that well over a year after launch, I went back and made an hour-long mini-documentary of sorts, cataloging the changes in growth and quality of Star Wars Battlefront 2. So much so that one of the reasons I started these kind of videos on this channel, and this channel in general, was the disappointment I felt over the launch of the original Star Wars Battlefront reboot. Not to belabor the point, but I've consumed a lot of Star Wars stories, in comics, films, shows, and I found an extremely common trend, specifically as of late. It's become harder and harder to surprise me with a story that uses its narrative to introduce new characters. Mostly because I feel like so many Star Wars stories are terrified of taking risks with new faces. So maybe then, it's for the best that Fallen Order makes a serious departure from the OG trilogy in one all-important way: tone. It feels almost artificial to say the words survival guilt and Star Wars in the same sentence, especially with a game. It conjures thoughts of forced tie-in novel storylines and disingenuously dark narratives, but that's kind of what the story is. A story of escaping Order 66, a story of survival, of loss, and of course, narrative is always subjective, but I can say with certainty that this is one of the better Star Wars stories I have ever played. Obviously, again, no spoilers, but let me substantiate that a bit. Cal, the protagonist, is admittedly a bit of a wet noodle. Calling him an imperfect character is kind of selling it short. He is fairly generic. He blends in with a sea of spin-off Star Wars Jedis, but he's very well voice acted and he's serviceable. But Cere and the rest of your crew, as well as everybody you meet on the way in almost totality, including the main villain's second sister, are where the real intrigue is. Almost every main character here has far more depth than anything we got from Battlefront 2's campaign. And most, at least in my opinion, do more to earn your intrigue than, say, Cal. I think what the story does best is two things. The first is it balances darker storytelling with characters and the hopefulness that Star Wars is known for. You've got your droid best friend, you've got your comedic relief, you've got your sense of isolation, and you've got your guiding past or current Jedi. This is all very formulaic for Star Wars stories, and for once, I'm going to use that term as a positive. There are so few Star Wars stories and games that seeing one match the tone and formula of, say, a film is impressive and exactly what I didn't know I wanted. It also does an excellent job of understanding when it's wanted and when it should take a step back and be a video game. This is not a story with a game attached, which at times is what felt like Battlefront 2 was trying to accomplish. This is the inverse. It is very much a game first. It doesn't take control from you so often as to break the experience, it never inundates you with exposition, and it certainly never pushes the story to the brink of tedium, especially with length. It manages to tell its story while also leaving you to play it, and it's that balance that helps aid the game's pacing throughout. And this is important, because pacing is maybe one of the game's few problems, which is now what we're going to start talking about, the not so great. Fallen Order is excellent, but it has its problems, small as they may be, and I think one of the biggest ones is pacing. It is all over the place in this regard. It will introduce intrigue, excitement, and then slow you up as you try to find your way back to your ship. It will toss you into exciting boss encounters and then feed you a game-halting fan puzzle. It'll make you feel like something big is coming and then serve you up another fan puzzle. That struggle with pacing is a fairly constant issue. There is a lot of backtracking in Fallen Order, and even though it usually involves new powers and a couple new routes, it's often hard to shake the feeling of been there, done that. And this is a staple of the Metroidvania approach. I know that, but it's not always fun in the context of this particular game's environments and traversal. Not enough is shaken up in between your first approach and your backtracking approach. However, other than that, the platforming can at times be imprecise and even annoying, though my biggest gameplay gripe comes with the Force itself. Push, pull, freeze is basically all you're working with here, and even when you fully upgrade your powers, it does feel like a bit of a step down from the Force playground that was the Unleashed series. In the context of this story, that type of Force use wouldn't even make sense, but I do, however, think that there was some room to expand upon your powers a bit, and a little bit of a missed opportunity when it comes to the hook of being, well, a Jedi. I still enjoy the suite of powers on hand, but it left me wanting a little bit more. The same also goes for the dying mechanic. I really like that there is actual punishment for failure. There should always be that in games, but every once in a while the game will fail to recognize that you've meditated recently, and set you back 2 or 3 and even once 4 meditation points, which is obviously a glitch, but it is a frustrating one. Still, technically speaking, Fallen Order is fairly sound. On PS4, I did hit a tiny bit of frame dropping, and on PC, I had my fair share of stutters, but they weren't enough to impact my enjoyment of the game. And even more strange, I really only saw them towards the beginning of the game. It didn't bother me too much, especially given that they were basically the only technical problems I stumbled upon. And yes, I'll say the sentence everybody wants to hear, no microtransactions, so that's great. If it sounds like I'm really positive on Jedi Fallen Order, it's because I am. If you had told me at the beginning of the year after Anthem's launch that one of my favorite games of that same year would be a game published by EA, I would have laughed until Starbucks started serving their holiday drinks. You know the ones I'm talking about, the ones that look really pretty and taste really good, but are never anywhere near worth the price you end up paying for them, yet great advertising and a location on every corner keeps you coming back. Those drinks. Yes, I am indeed using coffee as an analogy for EA's inept ubiquity. The point is, Fallen Order has all the glitz, the sheen, the marketing of an EA product. Advertised on every corner of the earth, given a beautiful coat of buy me paint and chock full of expensive but recognizable actors that make people go, wow, I know that guy, I want to buy that. But it's also something else. Jedi Fallen Order is a new kind of EA game. It's the kind where people that care make something worth caring about. It's the kind where businessmen let artists create, well, art. Fallen Order is the kind of game we should expect from a AAA studio and publisher. It's the new standard, and we should never let EA off the hook for anything less ever again. Well guys, that is it for today's video. As always, the start of a dialogue. What do you think of Jedi Fallen Order? More importantly, what was up until this point your favorite Star Wars video game? And does Jedi Fallen Order look like something, or if you've played it, is it something that surpasses that experience? If so, why? And if not, I'm even more interested. How come? Let me know the answers to any of those questions down in the comments below. It's a real conversation. As always, if you enjoyed this video, press that like button. If you have not yet done so, press subscribe. That way you won't miss anything that comes out on this channel. Also, next to the subscribe button, as I always say, is a little bell. That little bell, not as scary as it looks, all it does is make sure you're actually notified when a video comes out. That's it. So if you press the bell and the subscribe button, you will actually see my content when it releases. So do that as well. Really quickly, as I did with Outer Worlds and as I've done plenty of times in the past, I will make a more in-depth spoiler video for this game, but it'll be a little while. With Outer Worlds, I did it relatively quickly, and even then I had to keep out some of the more spoilery stuff. But if you want to see me talk about the music, especially in the later game, which is phenomenal, and you want to see me talk about more specifics within the story, that video will come soon. And until next time, guys, I'm out.